Throughout the history of X-Plane, we've seen a lot of third-party aircraft come and go. But if you're someone who's been following the franchise for a long time, you'll know that every once in a while, if we're lucky, something truly groundbreaking comes along. The new version of the Dash 8 by FlyJSim has definitely caught the community's attention. But does it actually live up to the extremely high expectations that have been set for it? To answer that question, in this video I'd like to take you along with me for a flight from Manchester to the beautiful airport of Inverness in Scotland, which happens to be located just next to Loch Ness and is also my birthplace. During the flights, we're going to review this product and see if it's worth the $79 price tag. Before I give my opinion on anything important, I'd like to make it clear that in our first video on the Q400, I was given a review copy of this aircraft free of charge to showcase on the channel. Now, although I meant everything I said in that video, I've since decided to purchase the aircraft for myself for two reasons. Firstly, I personally do not mind supporting FlyJSim, as I believe that they are developers with honor and integrity who deserve my support. Secondly, by purchasing this product, this allows me to be fully transparent and honest about my opinions in this video, which I think is very important in a review and is something that you deserve. So here we are on the ground in Manchester in the early morning, preparing for our 1 hour and 25-minute flight over the Scottish Highlands. In this first section of the video, I'd like to kick things off by talking about the visual aspect of the model. Now, I think that from a purely aesthetic point of view, FlyJSim have really been able to outdo themselves here, which is saying a lot given the solid reputation that they've built over the years when it comes to 3D modeling. It's kind of cliche to say, but the team has truly left no stone unturned, even to the extent that we have a fully functioning toilet lid. It's also the first time in X-Plane that we've seen an airliner with functional overhead bins and cabin controls, so that you can realistically simulate the invisible people in the back trying to awkwardly fit their baggage into the aircraft. All of these visual treats culminate in the cockpit, which I've got to say is visually one of the best that I've had the pleasure of exploring. Take a look at how these switches are animated. You can see that as a switch is flicked, it doesn't only rotate but also kind of gets pushed inward. The same quality of animation is present everywhere, ranging from the adjustable rudder pedals to the gear and the prop levers. By the way, just look at how the plastic separates as the levers move. Comparing this to aircraft of a similar price range, I think you'll struggle to find an add-on that has this many animations. For me personally, I'm not someone who is too bothered about the cabin and the toilet, but I can definitely appreciate the amount of detail in the cockpit. You'll be flicking switches and turning knobs a lot, so for me it really does make a difference to have them modeled to absolute perfection, which they definitely are. Another thing is the way the windshield isn't perfectly transparent but actually a bit dirty. This is done so well and is so subtle that the way I discovered it was when I thought my real life screen was a little dirty and I was trying to clean it, and then I suddenly realized that it was the virtual one. Now at this stage, it might already be time to talk about the elephant in the room. Unfortunately, I think all this visual complexity comes at a slight cost, and it's no secret that this aircraft is very hungry when it comes to your frame rate. On the ground in Manchester, Q4XP was running at 30 frames per second, whereas when I used FlyJSim's 727, I got 40 frames per second. This is definitely a noticeable difference in the simulator and can affect my experience quite a bit, especially if my machine is already pushing it in terms of scenery. Now, I do need to be careful here because what you're seeing is of course only my system, and it may differ for you or other people. In fact, if you own the Q4XP, please feel free to share your experience in a comment and to let other people know how your FPS is. In any case, you can find my system specifications in the description. Now, it could be that this is simply the price we have to pay for moving blinds and overhead bins, as well as one of the most extensive cockpits we've ever had in X-Plane. And in that case, it is completely up to you to decide if you think a hit of around 10 FPS is worth it. On a more positive note, when I see the amount of backlash that FJS are currently getting for this and their responsiveness when it comes to providing updates and listening to their customers, I can imagine this aircraft getting better optimized in the near future. What I would recommend though is to do your own research after you watch this video and to figure out what the current state of affairs is when it comes to the frame rate, because it could be that this problem has been fixed since the release of this video, and it wouldn't surprise me at all to see FlyJSim push out an update to solve this. After all, we've seen this happen to other aircraft such as the INI Builds A300 as well as the Flight Factor A320. These aircraft used to have horrific FPS, but it was great to see developers listen to the community and take action to resolve these issues. Since we're now already up in the air and on our way to Inverness, it's probably a good time to talk about the character of the Dash 8 in flight. As a professional 21-year-old armchair pilot, I can safely say that I'm woefully underqualified to make any statements about how realistic this aircraft flies whatsoever. But since that information isn't very useful if you're trying to decide if the Q4XP is for you, I'm going to try and make a compelling case for why FlyJSim's rendition of the Q400 flies like the real one would. To make this more concrete and less hand-wavy, something that's really cool about X-Plane is that I can visualize the torque effect of the engines. Here I've displayed all of the aerodynamic forces that are acting upon the aircraft, which includes the propellers. Each of the lines represents just one of the forces, which together make up the entire flight model. You can see that the propellers have lines in the forward direction, indicating that they are exerting thrust as they are pulling the aircraft forward through the air. But you can also notice that these forces are pulling forward at an angle. If we take a look from the front, you can see that all the forces are somewhat acting in a clockwise direction, and the same goes for the other engine. These forces signify the drag force of each propeller blade as it is rotating and scooping up air, with the drag going opposite to the direction of rotation of the propeller. If you were to combine all of these lines, what you would get is a rotational force or torque around the center of each engine. This torque is exactly what wants to rotate or roll the aircraft. Look at this graph of bank or roll angle over time. I've currently disengaged the autopilot and I'm not touching the control column whatsoever. Watch how the roll or bank angle increases as I ramp up the throttles. Note that when I apply throttle, what I'm actually doing is I'm changing the angles of the blades so that they take larger chunks out of the air. Given what we've just discussed, you can imagine that this also produces a lot more drag in the clockwise direction as the blades are going through the air at higher angles of attack. Which is exactly what we can see happening here. As soon as I cut back on the throttles, the torque reduces on both engines and the roll angle of the plane restores itself to what it once was. This is insanely cool stuff to me, and it's very neat to know that this is going on in the background as you fly this plane. As we start our descent into Inverness, this seems like a good time to go over these systems. I've played around with the FMS pretty extensively, and I've yet to give it a situation it couldn't handle. No matter what route or flight plan modification I throw at it, it's never let me down and is absolutely more than robust enough to fly on VATSIM with. We've covered the FMS in a tutorial in a different video where we discussed how it's relatively simple and is not as capable as the FMC in a 737, for example. This is entirely true to life and is actually something I quite like. It's a nice breath of fresh air to not have to fill in as many pages as you usually would. The FMS suits the plane very well and I found it growing on me over time. I enjoy the amount of thinking that it requires you to do as a pilot, since it makes flying this thing a real challenge and a steep learning curve. I think there may be 1 or 2 pages that are not yet functional, but this is something that I can very much live with since everything that is implemented works extremely well. As for the other systems, during testing it was very cool to see that each one of the circuit breakers actually works, which is something I personally have never seen before in X-Plane. One of the last things we still need to talk about are the sounds. Turboprops have a very distinct sound to them in the real world, which is easily recognizable. There is something very satisfying about hearing buttons and switches click. Or dropping the gear. Or even opening the door. But the engines really take the cake here, especially during startup as you increase the propeller RPM for the first time. Hopefully everything we've just been talking about will give a nice sense of what Q4XP can offer and what FlyJSim's latest adventure is like. All in all, the only thing that is a minor issue for me with this aircraft is the frame rate. 30 FPS is still doable, but I can imagine that if you're already pushing your system to the limit, then you may run into problems with this one. Before I give you my final verdict on this, I genuinely also love to know what you think. Are you considering purchasing the Q400 but you're on the fence? Do you already own the Dash 8 and you're having a blast like I am? I always read all the comments and I'd love to have a chat with you down below. As for what I think of this plane, I believe the sounds and feeling of this aircraft truly marks a new era for add-ons in X-Plane, and with X-Plane 12 around the corner, it'll be very interesting to watch this project evolve. And regardless of what you think of the aircraft, I think the way FJS handled the release of this and how they deal with customer support in general sets an example for the rest of the community. And as a brand new customer myself, it also gives me faith that the team I'm supporting are in it for the long run, as the people who produce this clearly are very passionate about it and take their well-earned reputation very seriously. The question of if it's worth the asking price is one that I'm going to have to leave up to you. My personal feeling about FlyJSim is that they are developers who have done a lot for X-Plane, and I don't mind funding people's part-time jobs who have been focused on the development of this for the last 3 years. And aside from getting a lot of enjoyment out of this plane right now, I also have a lot of trust and hope in the future of this thing, since I know how much effort went into creating it. On the other hand, $79 is quite a lot of money and is a significant investment. But if you can see yourself having fun and coming back to this thing for months or even years down the line, then it may be worth it. Either way, I would encourage you to take a look at other reviews and opinions so that you can make a well-informed decision about if this aircraft is for you. I personally am more than satisfied with the money I spent, and I'm looking forward to having many more flights in this plane. To conclude, if you'd like to watch more videos on the Q400 or anything else, give me a shout in the comments and I'll see what we can do. And if you're interested in the Q4XP, you may want to consider checking out our FMS tutorial or first look video at the Q400. And finally, as always, thank you very much for joining me, and we'll see each other again soon.